Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, July 12th, 2012. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. With this week, experimental hops. Karl Vanevenhoven from Yakima Chief shares some super secret hops and tells us how new hops come to market. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And our 2012 Brewers Logbooks are still in stock, just barely. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook as well, facebook.com/basicbrewing. And thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It'll take you there to the Amazon.com site, and whatever you purchase, we'll get a little hunk of. It won't cost you any extra. You'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we appreciate your support greatly. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone and Android podcast apps on the respective stores, and we're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, assuming it still exists, and we're on the Stitcher app, too. My being out of town so much for vacation, and for the Homebrewers Conference has resulted in a situation at my house. 3 empty kegs. So I've started to remedy that situation. Yesterday, I brewed up an experimental session beer. I tweeted about it, so you might have heard about it. It's a brew-in-a-bag batch, 4 gallons, 3 pounds of malted wheat, 1 pound of malted rye, half an ounce of Tettnang for bittering, with Saf Brew T58 as the yeast. My original gravity, 1020. I'm hoping that the rye will add enough body that the beer won't feel thin. If you remember, we did a 100% rye beer on the video podcast, and man, that stuff was like cough syrup. It was so thick. So I'm hoping that having 25% rye in the malt bill will add a lot of body to that low-gravity beer. I haven't decided what to do after the fermentation. I guess I'll taste it and see what it tastes like. Maybe I'll add some fruit, or maybe I'll dry hop with some of the experimental hops that you'll hear about on today's show. I don't know. I'll keep you posted. By the way, I posted a picture of that session beer in the fermenter out on our Facebook page, and Wes, one of our followers on the page, suggested I call it a rye wit. I think Wes has a rye wit as well. Let's that's right up our alley. Let's jump into the mailbag real quick before we move on to the meat of the matter. Lee Hare from Wallington in Victoria, Australia, has some feedback following last week's show on no-chill brewing. If you'll remember, we talked about fresh wort kits that are essentially containers of wort that are ready for pitching. All you have to do is take them home and put them in a fermenter and put some yeast in it, essentially, I guess. Lee is from Wallington's WRG, which is a store that sells those fresh wort kits. Lee says, fresh wort kits sold in our store are sold with a best before date set 2 years from the brew date. We've never tested this length of time, as the kits generally sell quickly. However, the brewer stands behind this length of time, as storing the wort for longer periods does not come with the associated problems one would consider with this method. Wort kits take some of the fun out of a brew day. However, the benefits are an all-grain quality beer without the labor. Well, there you go. I appreciate the clarification, Lee. By the way, Wallington's WRG sells our extract brewing and partial mashing DVDs. So, shameless plug there for Wallington's WRG. Brad Lovejoy also sent in a note after hearing the Keg and Barrel Outlaw Homebrew Competition being mentioned on last week's show. While I was down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, covering that competition, I interviewed Brad about another competition that was coming up at that time. Despite the fact that they're still working to legalize homebrewing in Mississippi, the number of homebrew competitions is apparently growing. Brad says, he gives us kind of a rundown of past and future events here. Brad says, November 2011, HBAM, that's HBAMM.org, hosted the state's first BJCP certified competition, limited categories, Mississippi only, 45 entries, 2 BJCP judges, lots of fun and very successful first competition. So that was a first step into the BJCP certified competitions. He says May 2012, GTR Brewers, that's gtrbrewers.org, hosted the second BJCP certified competition, but stepped it up a notch. Categories 1 through 23. Out-of-state entries allowed but not advertised on the AHA site or Zymergy. 115 entries that time. 3 BJCP judges made several improvements to the format. It was an awesome time, Brad says. Now, coming up, October 2012, HBAM will handle the competition coordination for the Jacktoberfest craft beer competition. You can find info about that at jacktoberfest.com. Last year, they used the same format as Keg and Barrel. This year, it is a BJCP certified competition, making it the third in the state. And then, in November 2012, HBAM will have its competition again, categories 1 through 28, all beer plus mead and cider, open nationally and advertised on AHA's site and in Zymergy, planning for 200 entries, 6 to 8 BJCP judges, including 3 new judges from the GTR Brewers Club. So, Brad says, you can see we are rapidly increasing the size and quality of homebrew competitions in Mississippi. Legalizing homebrew is a top legislative priority next year, so we expect the trend of more and better competitions and festivals to increase. Mississippi has a lot of catching up to do, and we are hard at work to bring us up to par. He says, if you can help by promoting Mississippi competitions and spreading the word about how the homebrew/craft beer scene is exploding down here, it will help out a lot. Well, gladly. So, thanks for the update, Brad. Look for those competitions. Go to those websites and find out how you can get involved. And I had a lot of fun down in Mississippi, and I'd love to get down there again. Maybe it'll cool down in October for Jacktoberfest. Now, you're about to hear the third of 4 interviews that we recorded for the show while we were at the National Homebrewers Conference. I want to especially thank Mark Emily for helping to arrange this one. Karl Vanevenhoven from Yakima Chief brought along 6 experimental hop varieties, along with one that's just now coming on the market. Karl had foil pouches of the hops, and members of the Impaling Ailers brewed up single hop beers with the experimental hops so that we could compare the ingredient in the raw with the end result. And I think those beers were also on tap at the conference as well. Now, we couldn't go into too much detail with the experimental hops because they're still in development, and we can't even tell you the identifying numbers of those hops that are still in the works for copyright and trademark reasons and such as that. But I hope you'll understand after the interview, after hearing the interview, how much work goes into developing new hop varieties and what it takes to bring a new hop into the market. Now, Karl brought his wife, Carol, who probably had the best palate in the room as far as hops go. Very impressive. And I brought Steve and Andy to help sample and give their impressions. Well, here we are in our palatial suite here at the hotel. And here we have the regulars, Steve Wilkes.
Hi, everybody.
And Andy Sparks.
Hey, everybody.
And joining us from Yakima Chief is Karl Vanevenhoven.
Welcome.
And his wife, Carol.
Hello.
What do you do exactly, Karl?
I am the Director of Operations at Yakima Chief, so that involves a little bit of everything that touches the hops. So everything from when the growers are bringing the hops in at harvest time to cold storage, pelleting, extraction. We even do a little separation on the hops, separating the alpha from the beta and oils, the aroma fractions, and then shipping them worldwide. We've got sales offices internationally, so a little bit of everything.
And you're lucky to have a supportive spouse who apparently likes to play with hops as well.
Yes, definitely. So I'm that girl that you sit down next to on an airplane and you start drinking a beer, and I spend 60 minutes telling you all about the beer and hop industry. And you're like, wow, you really know a lot about that. Why is that? Well, I married into it 9 years ago.
I haven't sat next to anybody like that yet.
I never get that girl on the plane.
James, and I'm pretty lucky because yesterday was actually our anniversary. So how many guys can say they took their wife to a National Homebrew Conference for your anniversary?
Yeah, congratulations. That's wonderful.
Great.
So we've just spent the past few minutes evaluating some hops. What have we been doing here?
Well, we've been evaluating hops from our partnership we have with the Hop Breeding Company, and they're developing new varieties through traditional breeding, doing crosses between different varieties of hops. And we have 7 varieties with us here today from Hop Breeding Company, and we gave these 7 experimental varieties to the Homebrew Club here in Seattle, the Impaling Alers, and props to those guys. We just tried some really good beers.
Yeah. We gave them a task of doing a single hop beer. It's mild as far as the malt profile is, but the hops really stand out nicely on most of them. Some are more subtle than others. But it was interesting because we sampled the beers and we actually got to smell pellet hops and whole hops at the same time. So we got to see how the raw hop translated into the beer. So what do we have? We have one that you can talk about.
Yes, actually, one of the 7 hops is, I guess, no longer an experimental hop. It was called HBC 369, and last month at the Craft Brew Conference, the Hop Breeding Company released the name of that hop, and it's called Mosaic. And I believe they chose that name Mosaic because it's a very complex hop. There's a lot going on with it. It has everything from tropical to berry. There's some earthiness to it. It's a very kind of big Northwest-style IPA hop that I'm sure you'll see that variety going in a lot of those beers. And a little bit of data on that hop. The alpha is about a 12 to 13. Beta is about 3 to 4. And the cohumulone content is about 24%.
It was delicious, and I think it spoiled us for the rest of the 6 samples, don't you think?
Yeah, it was definitely the most developed of the hops. I mean, you could really tell it was worth moving on to the market. Yeah.
What were y'all's impressions?
Well, I thought it was really super intense. It had a lot of kind of aromatic punch right out of the glass, which is one of the things I really like. So yeah, as you lift the glass towards your face, you could actually smell it, and you anticipated the way it was going to taste. Had a lot of kind of resinous, the intensity that I think a lot of people look for in the kind of what we call West Coast hops.
Yeah, that was these are fairly moderate gravity beers, I would assume. So it'd be interesting to see how that comes out in say a double IPA or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that those are, if not on the market, on their way to being on the market, right? Those beers.
Yeah, actually there are some beers on the market that have been, we've probably sent that variety out to a good dozen or so breweries. And supply is pretty limited, and I was asked yesterday, I was like, well, when will we see this hop in the homebrew market? And I'm guessing probably 2013 crop, because right now there's way more demand than we can even supply right now. So we're expanding acreage as much as we can on the grower level. And, of course, it's just like some other varieties that have come out of the breeding program like Simcoe. We're expanding acreage about as much as we can, and it's just tough to keep up with demand. So we hope to see 369, or Mosaic, I should call it, in the homebrew shelves here within the next year, hopefully. That'd be nice. But might take a little longer.
So how long has that hop been around? I mean, or maybe you could tell us kind of the story of hop development through that hop and some of the other hops that we have tried today.
Absolutely. Well, breeding is about a 10-year process, and it starts with hops are a dioecious plant, meaning there's a male and a female. So you do a cross where you fertilize the female plant with the male plant. So male plants are not available commercially because they cause seeds, and you don't want seeds in your hops because it can cause some off flavors and actually contribute to poor shelf life and staling. So the males are kept way out of the way out in other areas of the valley. So in the breeding program, after they do that cross, they're going to get actually several thousand seeds out of that male and female. And I like to describe hops as like people. You take a male and a female, and they can have several kids. And some parents, all their kids look the same, and other parents, their kids are all different. And hops are kind of that way too. Some crosses, you get very similar hops that come out of that, and others, very wild variation. And even the parents, it could be totally different. You could take some noble hops and cross them and come out with a super alpha. You never know what you're going to get sometimes. Usually, though, some of those genetic properties are going to come through. So in the early stages, they call it fail fast. So they're looking for agronomic qualities, disease resistance mainly. So you could have a nice hop from aromatic qualities, but if it's not going to produce, or if it has poor disease resistance, it's going to automatically be failed. And so you're going to fail 90% that first year or two, and then they start moving later in the program, and they're going to move out to a commercial field with one hill, which is one plant that's strung out in the field. That's my favorite place to walk through during harvest, because you get to literally walk through this field of all these different people, but they're just hops, and you can just pick a cone off each plant and kind of rub it and smell it, and you might smell garlic on one, like, that's not my thing, and you grab another one, it's got this crazy tropical, just resiny aroma to it. And you're like, oh, that might make a good beer. And so that's kind of my approach to making a fresh hop ale. Is I like walking through that field and just picking whatever I like, throw it in the bag. I don't even know what I used, other than just a bunch of different experimental hops that aren't really to market yet. So that's the single hill plots, and that'll be in year maybe 3, 4, 5 even. And some of those are actually, they'll go through and hand select the ones they like and do some analysis on those for alpha, beta, and then just take notes on aroma. And then the ones that are performing well there will advance to growing several hills, and then start going out to brewers and saying, hey, what do you think? Now,
So each one of our favorite hop varieties started with one plant?
One plant, one seed that turned into one plant, and it probably took 3 to 5 years being in that single hill, then being expanded, and the breeding program is talking to brewers, finding out the things they're looking for, because of course, like people, they're all looking for different things. So the hops we evaluated today, at least 6 of the 7 are in that experimental stage, to where we at Yakima Chief received anywhere from 1 bale to 10 bales. And so they're moving on. They're in that year 6, 7, 8 maybe. And then, of course, Mosaic is kind of in that year 10, where its brewing trials have been done the last 2 years, and we've gotten very good feedback on that. So it's now a commercial variety. But the ones that we got 1 to 2 bales, that's not enough to pellet. So we only had leaf samples. And then the varieties where we had 5+ bales, we had enough to do a very, very small pellet run. And so those were the pellet samples that we looked at today.
So, Karl, I think one thing that's interesting to explain is, how do you go from one hill to multiple plants? How do you actually grow it into a whole field?
Yeah, thanks, Carol.
You just take over, Carol. It's fine. I'm a little hoarse from last night, so you jump right in.
This is where I wish I had Jason Perold along with me, because he's the breeder and knows these things. But you can do a couple different things. The main way to propagate is just by cutting rhizomes. So basically the roots. And what you're doing with those varieties is just cloning them, so you have a pure variety. You can do other things like cuttings off of some of the leaf material, the vines themselves, and then you can pot plants and expand acreage that way as well. A little more tedious that way and more costly, but that's basically the way you're expanding a variety.
So if people like it and people are brewing with it in test batches, and then it's determined to be market worthy, then it gets blasted out into production. And I would assume that it takes a little while to actually crank up the amount that you would need to be established as a fully mature commercial crop.
It does take some time. They can expand acreage rather quickly, but the demand, especially with the growth in the craft industry, the demand seems to be outpacing the growers. And a lot of these, even established varieties like Simcoe. And the crazy thing about Simcoe is that variety almost disappeared back about 10 years ago. It was kind of unknown amongst a portion of the craft industry, and there wasn't any interest from the large brewing community. So that variety just kind of hung around for a little while, and there was actually a period of time, a little over 10 years ago, where we were trying to sell it and not having much luck. And then, of course, it quickly took off from there once the craft industry got a hold of it.
So in a sense, it's up to the whims of the brewers and the whims of their customers and what's in fashion at this point. And right now, we're all into big, juicy, IPAs and double IPAs and big, powerful hops. So theoretically, could we have a kind of a boom and bust kind of cycle going on with the different varieties of hops?
Well, and that's all up to personal taste. We're not just focusing on those big Northwest style resiny hops. Actually, there's two main focuses that the breeding program has. One is alpha hops for the alpha market, and the other is aroma hops for not only the craft market, but a lot of the world's big brewers do use a lot of aroma hops as well. And in that market, with lighter beers, they're looking for more noble style hops. So there is emphasis on that. There's even some demand for a zero alpha hop, believe it or not. So there's a lot of different feedback that we get from the brewers, and there's a lot of direct work with brewers on the breeding side of things.
So how do we do with our? Some of us, Andy and I think, got a lot of palate fatigue. Fairly earlier through the process than Steve. Is that something that you see in these panels? It's that people have different sort of talents or skills on these tasting and smelling panels?
Yeah, and we did kind of a unique tasting today because we tasted a beer and evaluated it, and then we opened the foil bag of hops to see how the beer actually showcased the hops. And again, compliments to the Impaling Ailers, because I thought they did an exceptional job of, you smell that beer and it smells a lot like the hop. And a couple of hops had a little bit of what would be considered negative qualities, maybe some of the onion, garlic, or even a little bit of sweaty. But the cool thing was the beers kind of left those components behind and still contained all the good citrusy, tropical, stone fruit, pine, those type of desirable qualities. But onion, garlic can actually, it's kind of a weird descriptor because it can actually turn out positive in a beer too when it's present. Yeah, they did an excellent job with the beer. So by smelling those hops after drinking the beer, I think is one of the reasons we got a little more palate fatigue than you would expect, because smelling the hops obviously are a lot stronger than the beer. So, but that was a fun experiment, and it verified the good job they did brewing the beer.
Yeah, they did a really good job. None of the beers had any defects that I could detect, and they all were. Surely they weren't all done by the same guy or gal, but they were consistent in the style throughout. It'd be interesting to see what somebody's impression would be walking from the hallway into this room, because we've had all these open foil bags around, and I'm sure it may be pungent by now. And we may have to borrow a vacuum to get the hop debris off the floor before the arrest warrant is issued for the suspicious materials in the room. What were your impressions, Steve, throughout the process?
Well, to echo what you said about the quality of the beers, and I thought all those beers were very drinkable. I was impressed, or struck, maybe it's a better word, by how similar the hops were to each other. I expected them to be very different. Lots of variation, and I had said earlier that if I was to graph out my little chart here, it would just be kind of a real bell curve. And so all of them picked up all that kind of juicy, citrusy, piney stuff that you would expect in a Northwest hop. I didn't find any of the hops off-putting in the beer. I found some of them off-putting when I just opened and smelled the package. And I liked your remark, Karl, about how even the onion and garlic could be okay, that there's even a place for that, because I picked that up in a couple of the beers a little bit, and I thought, it's okay. It tasted okay there. It was right. So, and that's a flavor component that, frankly, until today, I had never considered. I'd never considered onion in beer, and so when I'm smelling that either in the hop or in the beer itself, and thinking onion, okay, so maybe that's that power of suggestion we'll talk about, but maybe it's not. I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I really found this experiment to be quite enlightening for myself. I consider myself a fairly educated palate, or to have an educated palate about beer and hops. But I really struggled to smell the aromatic differences, especially after the first couple beers. I just kept putting my nose in there and just breathing as deep as I could, trying to be able to just put my finger on the different little indicators. And we had a list of suggested of aromatic qualities, piney, and so forth. But still, it was a real struggle for me, which really kind of is a frustrating thing as a beer lover and somebody who considers himself really passionate about aromatic hops.
Talk about the descriptors. What were we looking for?
We put together a list here, and this is actually stems from a sensory panel that Hop Breeding Company has put together, where they've taken a number of us from the hop industry who are familiar with the hops, and did a whole series of training. And we actually worked with Tom Shellhammer at Oregon State, who created some standards from their lab that actually were not hops, but actually just standards that smelled like these things. We used that as a training tool and evaluated a number of different hops. And actually we evaluated first non-hop things that had these aromas to them. So we've kind of taken that training, and then we're now expanding that to beer. So the descriptors we had, in no particular order here. Actually, they are kind of in a particular order, because some of these kind of group together, like cedar, pine, tobacco, and then grassy, herbal, floral, and spicy, and then citrus, stone fruit, and tropical fruit, and then onion, garlic, and sweaty.
That last one, I laughed at that last one because there's no way that we could smell sweaty in a hop, and then I did. But I don't, and it was a couple of samples later. It wasn't that right after that, so I don't think it was planted in my perceptions. But Carol, does it get easier over time with practice?
It does get easier over time. We practice a lot at our house. That's from the very beginning. I've been trained as the beer smeller. So whenever we do a batch of homebrew, my job is to smell it, and I usually am given 2 or 3 other beers to smell and describe the characteristics and kind of pick them up. I think that's one of Carl's favorite stories with me of all time, as we were at Hop Union at Hop and Brew School, and he came up and he said, "Honey, smell this beer." And I smelled it, and he's like, "What hops are in it?" And I named the 3 hops, and the guy standing next to him just went, "Whoa."
You're scaring me, Carol.
That's a keeper. Do you find that women are better than men, or are there differences between the genders?
Actually, yeah, women seem to be able to just pick things out better. They have a better nose. That's kind of a old wives' tale, I guess. But no, actually, it seems to have a lot of truth that women have a better nose.
And some of those descriptors we were talking about, like spicy, spices themselves can have everything from a peppery to a more savory character to each spice. So, that in itself probably could be expanded into, subcategories of that. But I guess after a while, you don't want to get too kind of granular on the descriptors that people are trying to pick out, because if you present people with too many choices, they're going to get frozen with indecision, probably.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too about hops is there's hundreds of different oil compounds, many of which are unidentified, and there's that huge range of you could have a nutmeg smell to a coriander, and you can take styles like a Belgian wit that rather than using orange peel and coriander, you could actually use hops that have those qualities and not use all the other spices and things. You could probably find a hop to make just about anything you want. Of course, to a certain extent, a strong framboise or something, you can't get that strong of raspberries out of hops. But there's always, that's one mosaic has been described as blueberry before, which I don't really get. But I don't know if any of you got the blueberry out of mosaic today, but it has commonly been described as that.
I didn't get blueberry, did you?
No.
I got fruits, but...
I got really fruity. And I would say of the of all these hops, that's the one that it was. Maybe I've already said this, but that's the one that's ready to move to market. I mean, that's a really good hop, and it's ready to be out there. The rest of these aren't.
In Steve's humble
In my
opinion.
But
So-
just mean that they haven't been developed. You know, they're not quite done. They're not quite off the hill yet. You know, compared to Mosaic, which really just was so balanced, and that beer was just wonderful. And like Andy said, you know, he just held it up to his nose. It was just like, wow. And that's what you want.
So does the character of a hop change over time? I mean, that particular plant, does the character of the cones coming off of that plant change over time?
Yeah, one thing that we've seen is a single hill is kind of babied. You know, it's one plant, and then once you throw it out there across 40 acres, it's, you know, Mother Nature has a little more of an impact on it, and we've seen there's a couple hops that we've advanced to that acreage on the alpha side of things, looking for a 18+% alpha hop, and they were producing that, and the single hill and even a few hills, and then once it was expanded to multi-acreage, all of a sudden that alpha declined, and we're not sure why. And there's even one variety that the alpha was phenomenal for about 5 years, and then all of a sudden it started declining. So you'll see some changes like that once the acreage expands. So yeah, that's something that Mother Nature, you never can tell what curveball she's going to throw you.
And I guess weather has an impact as well.
Oh yeah, in the last 2 years we've had these cold springs, and that's hard on babies. And baby hops are in their first year planting. So the Yakima Valley is the one region in the world where we've got all the long day length and a lot of heat and all that irrigation water from the reservoir, so we can actually, in a lot of years, produce a 70-80% crop. But the last 2 years that was a bit of a struggle, which kind of hurt with keeping up with demand from the craft brewing industry. But this year's been quite warm, and the baby crop is looking good, other than the hops that were planted late, of course, are going to be behind. But the hops that were planted on time are looking really good.
So talk about these 6. I mean, we can't say the official numbers, but you can maybe describe the character of each of these hops and where they are in the maturity process. And
okay. Well, one thing I could start with is just kind of talking some alpha numbers. All these hops actually are quite high in alpha. The lowest one is 12.1%. The highest one is 18.6%. And actually, I think that was our third one that we evaluated, which was labeled as number 2. Which that's probably my favorite of the hops that hasn't been released yet. But that variety, much like Mosaic in some respects, but has more of the, I think, on the earthy side of things, but still has a lot of. I gave it a lot of citrus and tropical, and I've actually brewed with that hop a couple times, and have made some pretty good beers out of it. So, and that one is a little further along. I think we got 10 bales of it this year, so that's about an acre of hops. So it's getting to that stage where we've had it go out to brewers, and what the breeding program is doing is working with several craft brewers and sending out samples and then getting feedback. So, and that's really what we're looking at, is direction from the brewer themselves. So I'd say 2 of these right now have a very good chance of becoming commercial varieties in the next 3 years. And the interesting thing about that hop that's 18.6% is it was originally being looked at as an alpha hop. But then we looked at the oil profile, and it has a lot of favorable qualities. So, when you talk about a dual-purpose hop, you're usually talking about something, is in that 10-13%. Yeah, you can use it as a bittering hop, but if it's in scarce supply, you're not going to do that. You're going to use it as an aroma hop. But this one truly would be a dual purpose with an alpha that high. And you think about your middle additions and how many BUs you can get out of it, plus get some aroma, might be a pretty nice hop.
And how are we doing, market-wise, as far as, here several years back, we had a market scarcity of hops, and people kind of panicked, and how are we doing nowadays?
These days, the alpha market is still in a long position. So when the alpha shortage happened, acreage went up worldwide, and there's been some reluctance to pull that out, especially in Germany, where you've got smaller farms and a couple extra acres. When you got a 10-acre farm, it's like, we'll just leave it in the ground and see what happens. But there's definitely been a pullback in acreage, and we're probably, it's hard to predict. If we had a crystal ball, we'd be doing something other than we all are. We'd still be drinking beer, but yeah, it's hard to say. I'd say in a couple of years that alpha market's going to kind of be back in balance, and then the aroma market is just plan it as fast as you can, because keeping up with the demand has been a bit of a challenge.
Andy, as a homebrew shop owner, do you want to chime in here? Are there any questions you want to ask Karl, or this is closer to the source than you probably are used to being?
That's for sure. Yeah, we currently struggle to bring in good alpha hops, and we every single day have to give people alternatives to the hops they come in and ask for, because we just can't get them. We have a small shop, so I'm not able to get contracts and stuff like that like brewers can. So I'm kind of at the whim of my distributors and the wholesalers to whether, I'm going to get some when they get it. So it's pretty tough, and I'm really glad that I met him.
Get Karl's business card, will you?
Yeah, and that's certainly a challenge, but I'm sure you've seen the improvement, especially if you go back as far as 20 years and the hops you can get. But that whole supply chain is a bit of a challenge. But Yakima Chief has a partnership with Hop Union. Yakima Chief owns a percentage of Hop Union, and Hop Union has made a lot of strides in getting to that homebrew market. They've actually put in new automated packaging equipment. I don't know if you saw in the packets they handed out, the new packaging they have, that's off their automated packaging line. So hand-filling 1-ounce bags is extremely tedious.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Very familiar with that process.
So now they've got a process where they can open up 44-pounders and pour it into a hopper, and out spits these 1-ounce or 1-pound bags. And so that's able to get hops to market quickly, more efficiently, and fresher. So you're not taking the time to do it by hand. So they're serving that market much better now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, the difference between the number of hops that I used to stock when I first started the store, I mean, there was a handful, and they were the ones that everybody knows, Cascade and, Chinook and Fuggles and East Kent Goldings and the handful of noble hops. But that was about it. There might have been 12, 15, but now there are so many things out there, and people come in and ask for hops that I've never even heard of, and their friend has got a recipe that includes that hop. But yeah, I mean, and it's pretty hard for me to stock, 50 varieties of hops in my little store, but it's really exciting. It's a wonderful time if you like aromatic hops, because there are some really, really fun things out there right now.
So do home brewers drive the process at all?
Well, that's a good question. Historically, no. The homebrewers are kind of getting probably the end of the line of what's available. Obviously, hop dealers have to take care of their big customers, and if they buy it all up, then there's, if it's Cascade and they're buying all of it, there's none left for the homebrew shop. But that's definitely changed. Hop Union's working with some of these big distributors, and now there's a lot of online distributors, and they're placing orders with contracts just like brewers are. So they're in line right with the brewers. So there's definitely been a change there. And in contracting, I heard someone say it today in one of the presentations, contracting is kind of a means of communicating. And so when you have a contract, say you need 1,000 pounds of Cascade, that tells the dealer, which tells the grower, and then you add all those up, okay, this is how much acreage we need of that variety. If you just play the spot market, nobody knows that one day you're going to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need 44 pounds of Cascades. And that's becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of the buying that's happening. And you certainly can use contracting as a hedging mechanism, not knowing what the market's going to do. You can put 75 to 90% of your hops in a contract. You're going to get those, and you know what price you're going to pay, so you can budget. And if you want to play the spot market on the other, you can never forecast your own growth in your brewery or your homebrew shop. So contracting has been a very good means of communicating and trying to keep those balances in line on each variety.
I guess if you look on the positive side of that, if you are a home brewer who's stuck in a rut and always uses X, Y, and Z hops, but there's a shortage and you're forced to use another kind of hop, then you might discover something new. You might discover a new interesting character in your beer that you're not used to tasting or smelling.
Yeah, actually, I was in one of the seminars today, and Dick Cantwell from Elysian said, if you have options, if everything is your option, creativity is actually difficult. It's when something's missing is when you have to get creative. What do you do? And you have to substitute a different hop, or that's when you have to get creative. How do you find it? How do you get it? What do you do if you can't get it? And so it's I guess it's nice to choose to be creative rather than be forced into it. But actually, I was just talking to a grower that I know quite well the other day. They mentioned to me they're growing 60 varieties on their farm, and that blew me away. I was like, when did you start doing that? And they're like, we decided we're going to grow every commercial variety we can, and they're growing all but about 2 or 3. And that's challenging too, because when you're harvesting, if you've got all of one variety, you're just going to go out there and pick it, and you're going to, it's okay to blend it, but when you start having all these different varieties and you're doing one kiln of just this variety, and then, well, you've jumped into a pile of hops before, Andy, so you can imagine having all these little piles and trying to keep those separate, and just your schedule goes haywire, and it becomes challenging. So most farms are going to grow maybe 10 varieties, and they're just going to kind of pick the ones that they're good at, and then there's picking windows. So they mature at different times, so you're going to choose some early varieties, some middle varieties, and some late varieties, and some late varieties if it's a big year, and that'll kind of make up your portfolio. And it's difficult to grow a lot of different varieties, so that also plays into the availability of certain varieties. It could just be that one grower decided they're not going to grow that variety anymore, and there might only be 3 guys growing that variety, and that doesn't usually happen, but it's definitely part of the equation with supply and demand.
So do you have challenges, or I guess it would be a challenge to keep up with the consistency if you've got all these different farms growing allegedly the same variety of hop? You want to, as a supplier, you want that variety to be consistent across the line. How do you handle that?
Oh, that's a good question, and we handle that kind of at receiving time. So we've got some employees who've worked for us for a long, long time, and they can basically grab a handful of hops and tell you everything about it. So they're evaluating that quality, everything from moisture, even temperature coming in. We want to make sure they're properly dried and cooled. And especially on the drying side, if they're too wet or too dry, they're actually a fire hazard. But it's a quality hazard as well. So, and then of course the appearance and the aroma are something that we're evaluating, which is subjective. It's hard to put black and white criteria on that, but regardless of what parameter it is, if something doesn't fall into that, then those hops will be rejected. So, and then the other area of consistency that we can do is if, for example, we have a hop that a variety that some came in is a little higher into on the alpha and some a little on the lower end, when we pellet, we can actually blend those different lots to then homogenize. There's homogenation that takes place in the pellet process. So we can make a nice consistent pellet there, so that the brewer who's expecting usually getting a certain alpha range, we're going to be within that range.
Very nice. So what's the future like?
What's the future like?
There's your crystal ball again.
Yeah, well, looking at some of these, like I said, I see 2 of these actually moving on. Steve, you didn't know if any of these others were quite ready to move to market, but on the leaf side of the samples, we'll be getting, I think, better samples of those in the future, because it's hard to pick, it's hard to dry. Just 1 or 2 bales, and then of course they were in bale form, and here it is in June, and we're working with leaf, so they've had a lot of time to oxidize. And actually I have some storage numbers on these too, and most of these hops store very well, which is another criteria we're looking for, which you don't know until a year later.
Right.
So Cascade, for example, is a beautiful hop, but it doesn't store well. Right. So it can oxidize and get pretty catty on you. So we're looking for hops that store well too, so that regardless of when it gets pelleted, and of course in a reasonable amount of time, it's still going to be of good quality. So the future, I see more hops coming online, more varieties, but we can't flood the market with 1 million different varieties. At some point you reach a point where it's just inefficient. But people do want more options and more than just, the Citra's just come out, now Mosaic and Simcoe, they consider these big resiny Northwest style hops, and people are looking for other things too. So I think you're going to see some other types of varieties that may be a little more singular in their aroma characteristics, or just different or higher alpha. But I think the higher oil content hop is going to be something you're going to see more and more of, and I think there's going to be more data available on that.
Very nice. You guys have any more questions?
No, not really. I have an observation from last night at Pro Night. I was really struck when I went around to the different breweries and I would say to them, give me your best beer. What are you proud of tonight? And I was really struck at how many of them gave me session beers, low hopped, not giant hop bombs, not giant alcohol bombs. And this is our 6th or 7th one of these conferences. So in the past, everybody would hand me the biggest beer they could ever possibly make. And last night was different. It really struck me. And so I'm wondering if we're beginning to see, I won't call it a backlash, but if we're beginning to see a different way to approach brewing, that we're kind of getting over that time period where everybody had to prove how many hops they could put in a beer and how much alcohol they could pack into it. And I just think that's interesting, and then I think that will affect the hop business. I don't know how, but somehow that's all tied together.
Well, that's a good point, Steve. I think it's twofold, too. If you look at the craft industry, it's still only 5%. So there's a lot of market share out there to get, and what market is that? It's light beer. So if you can make a nice session ale that, because I've also seen session ales that are still hoppy.
Yeah.
And it's not bitter, but there's hop aroma in it.
Sure.
And those are nice beers. They're easy drinking, but there's still some hop character to those. Yeah. And I think those beers can compete with that other 95% that's out there. And they're still using probably 5 times the hops in them. So as being in the hop industry, we like to see that still. So, yeah, definitely. And then, of course, there's the black IPAs on the other end of the spectrum, which personally I love, and those got a ton of hops in them. So there's that side of things going on, too. And more sour beers.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, very nice. This has been a lot of fun. I know you've got an event to go to, so I appreciate you. It's good to meet you all and talk to you in person, Karl. And thanks to Steve and Andy for helping out again. I know it's rough work, but somebody's got to do it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Karl, Carol, Steve, and Andy. That was a lot of fun. And the best part was that Karl left those hop pellets and whole cones for us to take home and play with, and I'm really looking forward to using them, especially Mosaic. And I can't wait for that one to become available in the homebrew store. In the meantime, look for that in commercial beers. Also, I look forward to playing with the other super secret hop varieties, even though I don't really know what I got. I just got bags of hops. I may just follow Karl's example. He said he walked through those experimental farms and just, picked a little here and picked a little there. I may just follow Karl's example in doing that and just kind of, test those samples, smell them, see what I like in different combinations, and just throw them in the beer and see what happens. So stay tuned. I'll keep you up to date on that. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits as well. You can find them all on our site, along with our dwindling supplies of brewers' logbooks. We've got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. And thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are the Well-Filled Tortilla Cookbook and Lego Star Wars Anakins and Sebulba's Pod Racers 7692. Thanks again, and remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.